Now that we know a little more about these different types of lizards, the next question is to try and figure out a little bit about their evolutionary history. We see this type of pattern frequently in biology where there are organisms that have similar structures, similar body shapes or limb shapes or tail shapes, or internal features as well. And there are a couple of different possible explanations that were just presented in that video. The first possible explanation for this has to do with what we call homology. The prefix homo means same, so homologous structures are structures that are similar, but in the case of homologous structures, that similarity results from common ancestry, which means they have the same genes that they've inherited from a common ancestor that code for those body parts. The story that they tell here, if this was a case of homology, we would expect an original species of lizard to have landed on the first island, and then from there, on this first island, each of those body types evolved. So we had our trunk ground and grassinoles and the canopy ones and whatever, but from here it branched into the 4 different types. And these 4 different types were kind of the common ancestors for each body type that we see throughout these islands. So then from there, this one spread to this island and this island and this island and this island. And so did each of the other body types. So in this case, if this is kind of how we explain this evolutionary history, we would expect to see that these lizards are more closely related to each other according to the body type. Let me just finish drawing this here. So then when we look at the actual relationships between these, if you look at the colors, the color kind of shows the relationships here. And in this case, when we look at all of the lizards on one island, they're not that closely related to each other. They are most closely related, like this blue lizard right here, would actually be most closely genetically related to the lizard of similar body type on different islands. So we would say that those lizards would be more likely to be related according to their ecomorph, not their location. If, however, this is a different type of similarity, if the similarity is not a result of homology, the other possible explanation is that these structures are analogous. They still look similar, but the reason is not because they're super closely related. The reason is because they're in similar environments, and so they're exposed to similar selective pressures. If this was the case, we would expect this type of pattern. The original lizards that arrived on this island kind of spread to all of the islands that we have here. And then on each individual island, because of the different environments there, we had the evolution of one lizard that became long and skinny with short limbs and lived in the trunks. And another one that lived on the twigs and had those super short legs. And another one that developed those really long tails for living in the grass. And with this kind of pattern, you can see that now all of these lizards within one island are much more closely related to each other on that island than they are to the lizards on the other island, because they all descended from this common ancestor, kind of the first lizard that arrived on that island. So if this is what's correct, we would expect them to be more closely related by location. So we can look at the patterns here to kind of try and figure out which of these actually happened. In order to do this, we do have to know the relationships between these lizards. And so scientists can go in and look for similarities in molecules like DNA and proteins. Obviously, your DNA codes for the proteins. And so by comparing those molecules, the more similarities there are within the DNA, the more closely related those organisms are. So we use technology to do this. We sequence and align the DNA. We use some statistical tools to determine whether this is a result of shared ancestry or whether the similarities are just coincidental. When scientists took these lizards' genetics and sequenced them, they came up with this phylogenetic tree. And so our question now, and what you're going to be looking at next, is because of how they're related, does this relationship line up more closely with their location or with their ecomorph? Which of those factors can kind of explain these relationships to us? So you're going to go back in and continue the case study now and take a look at the same phylogenetic tree, but color-coded in two different ways, one according to location and one according to body type or ecomorph. So that will help you draw some conclusions about the evolutionary history of these lizards.